Welcome back to the World Building Shrimp. Let's talk more about the giant snails of Allowayne. First, we have the most numerous snail livestock, the common maya, a respectable average of 6 feet tall. I think that the common snail will come in a wide variety of colors, depending on its genetic line, just for fun. And their shell, while I assumed it would just be the regular round shell, would be more interesting if it was more unusual. So their shells are cone-shaped with a gentle taper. These giant snails can produce eggs throughout the entire cycle, provided they are fed throughout the 3 years of rest so that they do not go into hibernation. They also need to mate every 3 months or so to upkeep their egg production. This isn't an issue when kept in groups, but some are kept as individuals by families, so neighbors will schedule in some play dates when needed. These maya are a usual sight in many areas of Allowayne. They are mostly herbivorous and eat food scraps from produce, wild plants growing in the fields, and also many types of mushrooms growing in and around forests. I had another idea for common snails, but I have completely forgotten it, so let's move on. The cliff maya are used to transport goods and passengers up and down uneven terrain and cliffs. They have spikes on their shell that allow things to be tied to them. These spikes point towards their head at the top of their shell and away at the bottom. When going up the cliff, bags are tied to the top spikes, and when going down, they are tied to the lower spikes. This is so that when snails climb the cliffs, the bags don't just slip off of the spikes. Cliff snails grow far larger than the common maya, large enough for people to ride on its back. These large snails are heavily treasured, and they are not often killed to be eaten, but they will be utilized at the end of their lives. The spikes on their shell are also harvested and used for weaponry and decoration. They rely heavily on the psyllium for negation of their weight. Snails are slow. It's kind of their thing. Even with the psyllium, they still move far slower than other beasts of burden. Their advantage, however, is their ability to climb any surface. These snails are utilized in areas of Allowayne with many cliffs and uneven rocky hills. While slow, they can at least make the trip. When I was designing the cliff snail, I thought I was maybe a little out there with the spikes already, let alone the size, so I didn't want to push it much further. Maybe a little longer on the shell, but then I found this guy, the Callonia Allard, a snail native to Cuba. The heck, dude? I thought only sea snails could look like that. I adore finding out when I'm wrong about how cool this world is. While I didn't really change anything about my cliff snails after I found them, it was still an inspiration and a little boost to the creative spirit just knowing that these guys existed. While researching, I also found a video of a large New Zealand carnivorous snail, called the Powelliphanta, that was eating an earthworm. As I clicked on the video, I had an expectation of what was about to go down. I thought that the snail would munch on the earthworm like a caterpillar munches on a leaf, bit by bit. I was very wrong. The result of the video left me horrified, yet fascinated. I will not subject you to this video without your consent, so if you're interested in viewing it, I will link it in the description. In essence, the earthworm is slurped down in a literal blink. I didn't know a snail's mouth could stretch like that. The poor worm had no chance. Anyways, cliff snails are omnivores that will eat plants and mushrooms, but also animals like maya worms, other snails, snakes, and whatever other animals they can catch and fit in their mouths. The cliff maya raised by people grow much faster than their wild variety, as they are given their food regularly instead of whatever meals they can scavenge or happen upon. Now for the Velu maya, or guard snail. This is one of my favorites, but surely a snail would make a terrible guard. They can't chase intruders, and what could they do if they caught them? Stick to them? Well, I thought it would be fun to give a species of my fantasy snails projectiles. Little cannons that shoot slime bombs. They don't need to outrun their target if their target can't move. So, following that thought, I found an animal that shoots slime to trap prey, and that is the velvet worm. So I mixed a little of the velvet worm into a giant snail, and now it's got little leggies, and oh my gosh, I'm in love. I hope you feel even a fraction of the joy that I feel when I look at him. But maybe they don't only have to be slow. They have the makings of movement with their little legs and the aid of a psyllium. If you reduce your weight enough, those little legs could propel you pretty fast, even if it was just for short bursts. Once they catch an intruder, how would they release them? I would imagine having a ton of snails as part of life would necessitate a way to get rid of all of the slime they leave behind. Alchemy is the easiest solution to this problem. I envision a type of potion where a few drops added to water would create a solution that allows you to wash away the slime. Maybe it dissolves it? Hardens it so it can be collected? I'm not sure yet. The guard maya has a wild variant, the hunter maya. These are not a snail you want to encounter. The hunters do not distinguish people as off of their menu. As they are mixed with a velvet worm, they have a saliva they inject into their prey while they are immobilized, which contains predigestive enzymes that allow them to eat basically anything that they can fit into their mouths. While people are typically too large to be consumed, this does not stop the hunters from trying. Next, we can talk about the tilling maya. These snails have a little piece of their shell on the back of their foot that acts as a plow, carving through the soil as they move. Creating shallow trenches aerates and mixes the soil, including mixing their slime in. I think that the slime could help with water retention in the soil, and I've read that it acts as a pest deterrent, which I could definitely work with. Little seedlings are very susceptible to damage from pests. They're slow, but they're worth the time for some because they do not require external equipment such as a plow or its operator. Plus, they can just eat more than a cow does. I based the tilling snail's plow off of a real piece of snail anatomy called the operculum. It's mostly found in sea snails, but it does exist in some land snails as well. The purpose of the operculum is to shut off the entrance to a snail's shell, keeping them safe from predators and from drying out. It rests on the top of the foot and behind the shell. For my fantasy twist on it, I moved it a little further back and had it come to a point. As the snail contracts its foot inwards, the plow angles into the ground. The wild variety of the tilling snails use their operculum to dig deeper nests for their eggs, and to dig up different types of food like roots, mushrooms, and worms. Farmers can actually utilize snail manure as a good fertilizer too, much like worm castings. Something holding up the video has been the painted snails. I've done a lot of research into whether grinding up shells could create usable pigments. All I found is basically, yes, they can, but they're kind of weak compared to how vibrant they look on the surface of the shell. It's still pretty, but it's not what I'm looking for. So reality has failed me, but that's okay. I'll take matters into my own hands. I world build fantasy for a reason. My snail shells will be very bright all throughout, instead of just one thin layer on the surface. The painted maya is a species of snail that is bred for their colors, both as decorative pieces of shell or to be ground up and turned into pigments. Farmers of painted maya keep their colored flocks separated, to keep their colors pure and vibrant. Often, farmers specialize in only one color, so they don't have to worry about it. Usually whichever color was most in demand when they got into the trade. Multicolored painted shells are usually for decorative purposes, while single-color shells are better for pigment making. Otherwise, the colors would have to be separated before grinding to preserve color. Though there are certain color combinations where they don't bother because the resulting mix is still good. Painted snail shells also grind into shellstone, but it is more valuable as a color than it is a building material. Large or small pieces of painted shell can be incorporated into the exterior of shellstone walls for pops of color. Now we have the glass snail, or the knotlin maya, also known as my personal nemesis. I made them work. Eventually. These snails, as their name would imply, have shells made out of glass. They were mostly created because I needed a good source of silica and trace minerals to mix with the shell dust in order to make my fantasy cement called shellstone, but they have grown past this basis now. Glass snails are bred in cool, sandy environments. They must take in and digest sand in order to grow their glass shells. There could be so many different and beautiful types of these snails, and colors too. Their common shell shape is round and flat. The advantage of this is that when harvesting the glass, it can be processed and used as pre-shaped window glass. In areas where glass snails live, round windows are common. The light that shines in through these windows is tinted beautiful colors and slightly warped into dancing lights by the spiral of the shell. The glass snail has a multi-layered shell. The outer layer is translucent glass while the inner layer is opaque. An in-universe reason would be that you don't want to show your predators exactly where your organs are under your armor. The real reason is, I don't want to draw snail organs. I tried. It didn't go well. It's easy enough to separate the layers of the shell in order to have fully translucent glass. So, while researching, I found out that opals are made of silica. Granted, it's a complicated arrangement of silica and water, but wouldn't that be cool? Snails with opalized shells. Like those ammonite fossils that turned opalescent, but this time they're designed that way and while they're still alive. I just really like opal, and I don't care if it's devalued by having so much available. It's still valuable, because it's gorgeous. So, the prettiest opal shells are sold to artisans for making jewelry and ornamental weapons. even windows for those wealthy enough. I actually got my hands on some opal recently, and I was surprised that it's not really that see-through, so they're allowed to not have the opaque layer to their shell. I want a city that specializes in opal snails to be just filled to the brim with opulence. This last variety of snail I didn't mention in the previous video. Why? I forgot about them. But now that I've rediscovered the snail from my notes, I can break into another part of my world, the folds. Folds are basically portals. They connect Allowane to other parts of itself, to Earth, and to Etherin, another dimension. Unlike most portals in fantasy, they're not just wide open doors that allow you to simply stroll through them. Folds expose you to the energy of Etherin when you cross them. Etheric energy passes harmlessly through non-living things, but living things must be warded or inured in order to safely use a fold. Inure means to become resilient towards the ill effects of ether exposure. Effects otherwise are disorientation, nausea, clouded vision, numbness, headaches, and more. Sometimes a fold is more like a tunnel instead of a window, exposing you to far more energy as you travel through. The longer the time, the worse the side effects, and the higher ward or inure you need. This is where the fold snails are highly useful. Through their inherent magic, they offer a way to ward yourself. Anything in physical contact with their shell will be covered in its ward. There are limitations on how much it can cover, correlating to its size. Fold snail shells can be made into ward ethki that users channel their own numen through to gain the effect of the fold snail's ward. This is an example of a naturally occurring enchanted object. These ethki, like most, degrade with each use, wearing down its magical framework until it is no longer usable. Fold snails are the smallest of the Maya, which allows them to pass through smaller folds. Using their wards expends a lot of numen, and so they should not be forced to make more than a few trips before allowed rest. A live fold snail's ward does not degrade like an ethki does. These Maya can be used as beasts of burden, a way to transport goods through folds without the adverse effects. Though they do not usually carry goods the whole way, just for the fold portion. I hope you enjoyed the second video on my fantasy snails. That's all I've got for now. I'm sure I will come up with more types of snails as I build up other parts of the world. Did any of these snails catch your whimsy? One of my goals with these videos is to spark inspiration in my fellow creatives, so please let me know if I succeeded with you. Remember, one word each day is still progress. Even at a snail's pace, with persistence, you'll get where you're going.